And I'll respond to the last question first, which was a good little one that came in.
From Graham.
That asked about, your research on roots. And the question was, is the same true of
Branches.
branches? And it's a good question. It's a question that is one that makes us think. And I like questions that make us go through the processes and we can come up with a reasoned position. It may be wrong, but I think it's right, by just applying our understanding of anatomy and of trees and going from that perspective. So, do you want to have a go at it, Peter?
Yeah, well, I was interested to hear what you were going to say about the differences between roots and branches, but obviously there is a difference. There's a
significant difference. One
of the reasons is that roots are in the ground, so they're not subjected to the same sort of stress from forces or pressure from forces that branches are. So they kind of work differently and respond differently. And I think we get a little bit too tied up in wanting everything to be nice and neat and tidy when we're pruning branches. Following Shigo's work, we now like to prune to the branch collar. But when I think about it, I think, well, branches have been breaking off trees for a long time, and trees didn't seem to worry about it much before, so I can't really see them worrying too much about it in the last 20 years.
Okay, so I think you've got it earlier there when you said that roots are supported. They don't need, whereas branches have to fight gravity. So that's one difference. If we go back to Shigo and the branch collar, we're trying to cut at the branch collar. The reason we want to cut at the branch collar is it's where the trunk tissue goes around or has twisted, so it's wrapping around the branch. And when it does that, it then can divide sideways and close in, so you get that lovely little donut-shaped occlusion of your pruning cut.
But roots don't have the same necessity to branch in the way that trees do, and they also don't lose those bits that need that abscission zone to deal with the loss of that extra part of the
They do have bits die, and I say it of branches, whether it be underground or above ground, most branches die. By far, the majority of branches in a tree fall off. I would have to say 99.999% of branches drop off. They drop off as little twigs. They drop off as bigger twigs and bigger and bigger and bigger. So the vast percentage is shed. When it comes to roots are also shed. Not in the sense of efficiency, but in the same way. So branches are shed or branches die. The tree kills the branches if they can't support themselves. No social security in the branching system. So the branch has to have enough foliage to produce enough carbohydrates to put carbohydrates back into the system. If it can't put some money back into the bank, the branch might as well go. And that's why we see, for example, internal foliage shed on conifers when they get overly shaded. It's because they're not able to put enough photosynthetes back into the system. So they're taken away. Roots have to take up water, so it's a little easier. And they've got a bark on them, so they're protected. So their role is slightly different. Both are absorbing one water, one sunlight. So two very different functions. Roots have a lot more parenchyma or living cells, and that means they're better at resisting decay. They don't have a natural abscission zone like branches do, because they're usually pretty damn good at compartmentalizing. They live a lot longer, so the parenchyma is usually functional for a lot longer in the roots than it is above ground. But if you think about it, if I wanted to get maximum photosynthetic responses, perhaps a coronet cut would give me more foliage. And if I got more foliage, that could be good. The problem with that more foliage is that the tree is going to start shedding that over time. They're going to get bigger branches, and we're going to have some of those bigger branches shed. And when it comes to pruning, we're not about trying to maximize photosynthesis. When it comes to, we're not trying to minimize it, but we're not trying to maximize it. When it comes to cutting roots, we are actually trying to maximize water absorption. So getting new roots to develop, and lots of them, is desirable, whereas getting new foliage, I mean, you can get new foliage come from every cut. Just start making stub cuts, and you'll see little stubs of epicormic growth come out from all over the place, but that's not what we're trying to do when we're pruning. So I think that's one of the primary differences. Guys, I've got to welcome Jeremy Young to the team. Jeremy is a mentor that's decided to join with us today. So another great perspective. So Jeremy, the question we've got is, Peter did some research that showed that tearing roots, or breaking and tearing roots, had the result of producing more roots because we increased the surface area. And the question's asked, should we do the same thing with branches when we prune branches? And you've heard my response to that. Your mic's off, I think. Yeah. Somewhere there. That's it.
Try that. That's better. I think your response is spot on.
So, guys,
yes,
yeah,
you'll always get more foliage if you leave stubs.
Yeah, if you want to get, there's a time when you do want to get more foliage. There's absolutely a time when it comes to pruning you want to get more foliage. When you're hedging, when you want to create a hedge, that's one of the reasons we clip back and don't care where so much we're clipping back to, because we actually want lots of additional growth and lots of additional suckers produced. Make sense?
Yeah. Also, too, when you're dealing with storm damage, so rather than cut something back to a collar cut, leaving a stub will allow more growth to establish faster.
Yeah, excellent.
I think, though, that the response of branches being cut, being pruned in terms of the regrowth is very much light driven. So, yes, if there's available light, the stub will produce shoots and they will grow and become viable. But if the light's not there for them, even if they do have a go, they often don't remain viable, and you'll see those shoots die back off again. I think that's quite different to what's happening with the roots.
That's right, because again, we've got this light relationship. If I can't get enough photons to do the job of photosynthesis, then I'm screwed. I'm going to be aborted.
And I know from my work pruning power lines, you can control the sort of regrowth that you get by the type of cuts that you make. So if you only leave, a couple of shoots on a stub, they tend to be big, whereas if you can increase that number, then the growth response seems to be spread amongst the various twigs, and so the growth spurt is much less and obviously desirable if you're working around power lines.
Yeah, I can probably add to that. We've sort of contractors that I've got locally with power line trimming. We used to cut everything to collars, brush box, fast growing species, whatnot. And you increase that light, it just increases growth exponentially. I've sort of had a bit of a trial going last 12 months, 2 years on a couple of spans where we know we've had problems, and definitely agree with the Peter. It does make a difference. Yeah, I suppose letting in that light by massive cutting is not desirable, and aesthetically it looks a lot better leaving something there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, as long as we can keep the growth rate down to a level that's acceptable, that makes great sense, and that's going to be species driven. I think we all know.
Yeah, definitely.
So we put on 2 meters or 3 meters of growth quite happily in a year.
Yeah,
they're really hard to deal with.
Lefosterman and that is straight underneath the power lines. There's yeah, you
They're
can't stop
problematic,
it,
yeah.
but it is what it is. Yeah. So
It raises some questions about some of the things that could be suitable. And there's one that I've seen several times up in the northern rivers end of the world, and Peter will know where some of them are, and that's the use of Aracaria heterophylla under power lines. And you pick the well that you're going to stop it at, and you just cut it that well. And because it's uninodal, it only has one flush a year. You really can keep them to a world area below the wires, which is fascinating. So these big flying saucers essentially on a post. And so, yeah, again, we need to understand how plants respond to pruning. And the way to do that is to do things and to make mistakes and to screw up and go to a spot where a tree's going to get cut down but doesn't have to go for another 4 or 5 years and just knock the top out and see what happens. And that's something we don't get to do a lot, in part because the Australian standard says that the ideal way to prune is ABC, collar cuts all the way. And so to some extent we threw the baby out with the bathwater. So we don't know, for example, as Jeremy said, how do you deal with it when there's the top's broken out in a storm and you want to keep the tree? It's a tree's of value. And there is a loss of skill. And there's a great skill to be learned in pruning, in doing reduction pruning. I was in New Zealand 2 weeks ago, and I visited a tree, a jacaranda that has been reduced for 35 years, and that's been reduced within a half-metre growth zone. So over 35 years, it's gone no more than half a metre higher. And I see it. I can, identify it when I'm there, but it still flowers. It still sets flower. It, grows well. It looks good. It's just a nice thick dome at that height. And I think we lose that experience by not doing some of the bad things occasionally, like lopping a tree. Now, that doesn't go out and lop.
Sorry,
Jeremy?
I was going to say it's another example of that pruning regularly gives you a better result than pruning once and trying to get to the end.
Yeah. And Shago talked about that. He talked about the fact that, when you go to see a dentist and you've not seen one for 30 years, you don't say to them, look, do all the work today. You usually plan that over a period of time. And we've talked about this with subordination pruning. There's something good about taking more than 1 year, more than one visit to manage a tree issue. And particularly we're talking about trying to deal with older structural issues. Young trees with structural issues, one visit, that's fine. But, you're trying to get rid of a co-dominant stem with a, partial failure, and you want to take it all out in one go. That's a big hit. Whereas taking it out of 4 or 5 visits is a lot better for the tree. So that was a good question. Okay, next question I have that's been sent to me. Was from a guy. Yeah.
Mark, just going back to Graham's email, he did have a second question.
Yep.
I don't know if you want to deal with that now.
Yeah,
or
go ahead.
any thoughts on below ground anchors for stabilizing transplants or for making it harder for people to steal plants such as newly planted Xanthoria?
Yeah, look, I think a great thing in terms of using things like duckbills or platypus type devices to anchor in, or simply when you're planting, put a couple of timbers down. A system was developed by a guy called Cole Pittman called the Civic Plinth, and it's a really great way of stabilizing small things. Rather than going above ground, you can keep it all below ground. So you put 2 timbers below ground and then run straps or cables across the top of the root ball and back down into the timber, tighten it up with a turnbuckle or ratchet, depending on what you're using, and then mulch over the top of it, and you don't see the bracing. I also think if you're having a problem with regular theft of things, there's probably something to be said for some of the new tracking devices that are out there today, although that doesn't mean you should go around with a still 090 to have a discussion with the person. That means that no, you should be probably passing that information on to the police. I think that technology is becoming better and better. I'm surprised that we are not microchipping trees or the area near trees at this stage. And I certainly have seen tree theft on a number of occasions. I've seen a 7-meter Phoenix canariensis disappear down the road on a semi-trailer that was stolen from a road site. I've seen a jacaranda, 6.5 tons, disappear. I found it a few years later, but what do you do when you find a stolen tree? There's not much you can do to resolve those problems. So, I think some of the more valuable stuff. I know my local council planted an Araucaria araucana, the monkey puzzle tree, and somebody decided they wanted it more at their house, and it's not me. So these things do happen. And it's interesting that the legal position on it is really clear. Unlike malicious damage to a tree or cutting down someone's tree maliciously, in New South Wales, the offence of stealing a plant is a lot more serious than the offence of cutting down a tree illegally, because it just comes under the same generalised category. The fine or the consequence is more severe for cutting it down, but the fact that there is an actual category for theft of plants, I think, and I think you'll find that same piece of or reference will be in almost all state legislation. So you'll have something in Queensland and Victoria, South Australia, that says the theft of plants, and that's in part because we come from this agrarian society where agriculture was really important to us 120 years ago. So do we think we've answered that, Peter?
I think so, yeah. Thanks, Mike.
So if you want to get on and find, any of those things, you'll see concealed bracing or concealed anchoring. If you can't find them, email Peter and we'll get some images up for one of the meetings. But they're worthwhile systems. So
thanks a lot, Mike and Peter, for the discussion. That's very informative.
If you guys don't ask questions, this whole system fails. And Jeremy's here, and Jeremy and I had a chat. We were in New Zealand together. Is that right, Jeremy?
Yeah, it was in New Zealand. Yeah.
And all of us feel this sense of we're getting older. Jeremy's losing hair, I'm gaining weight. There must be some inverse proportionality to the two. And we're going to croak it. And when we croak it, those things are going to be gone. The information we've got, the experience we've got. And so this is a chance to do it. And when I contacted Jeremy and a few others, one of the things I said is like, I wish when I was younger, I had something like this available where I could just, once or twice a month say, hey, I've got a question. I want to have it resolved. And I was probably more fortunate than most in that I did have a whole pile of phone of friends. I was lucky enough to be able to, talk with Alex and talk with Richard and Richard Harris, Dick Proudfoot, Don Blair. So there were lots of people around in my world that were of assistance, and that's really something that we don't generally like doing, and I don't know why that is. So I think it's a great thing that we're seeing the number of people getting involved and asking questions to be great, because there'll be people that are too afraid to ask the question, and hopefully we'll index this system eventually, and you'll be able to go through well, we know you theoretically can using AI. We'll get there, guys. It's just us older guys aren't so AI friendly. So if one of you are really friendly with that sort of stuff, you might want to put your hand up and volunteer. Okay. I need now to share my screen, Peter. Of that come through yet?
Yeah.
So Peter's going to open and show you. What is scary is that it's worse on things that have low levels of extractives in their heartwood. So things like maples, poplars, willows are really primary hosts of reproductive and thing. But this came across from Steve Kneebone, again, who will be joining us on occasions as a mentor. Steve's in Western Australia, runs a wonderful business over there. And this is only a small branch, but this has been absolutely destroyed by polyphagous shot-hole borer. And the problem here is this is on Corimbia. So now we're seeing damage occurring to other trees. Yeah, we've seen it in ficus already. So ficus is vulnerable, particularly stressed ficus. Healthy ficus tend to just see it on their dead wood, and that's not surprising given that dead branches on ficus are usually affected by Curculionidae anyhow. That's one of the reasons they get soft and they fall apart. You don't get big fig branches, dead branches falling off figs. You'll often get little bits crumbling. But the fact that it's gone over to
some species are more able to, or better able to compartmentalize than others. Does that ability appear to have any correlation with what's attacked?
No, it does not appear to have a correlation. The issue here is, can the beetle take advantage, get in? And there's the original response from the Western Australian government was to try and eradicate, which they've failed abysmally. That shouldn't surprise any of us. But there's been some real good work starting on trying all sorts of biological management programs. What it is once the beetle gets in and lays its eggs and introduces the fusarium, the deal's largely done. So it's a question of whether the beetle gets in to living tissue, actively growing tissue. If it gets into actively growing tissue, so I said maple, willow, poplar, erythrina. Now, most of us aren't going to be tragically disappointed if we lose willows and erythrinas. We might feel a little bit more loss for the poplar. But, it'll be a devastating loss if it hits the East Coast. Because unlike the West Coast, there'll be very little control, I suspect, in Queensland and New South Wales. Rob, you're in Victoria, so you're safe. You'll get another 10 years of protection out of the fact that your government is far more strict on quarantine issues than we are in this end of the world. We like spreading the diseases. You like to try and resist them. So, myrtle rust hasn't been anywhere near the same problem in Victoria because the Victorian government has had a lot better job in terms of patrol. These holes are about 1.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters in diameter, so very small. It's something to keep your eyes open for. They're perfectly round, typical of many Curculionidae, and they're uniformly consistent in size. So there's no flattening or D'ing or anything like that. They're just nice round holes. Gallery goes in, fungus comes in, and once that fungus is in, then that portion is going to die off. So quite scary that we've got it. Not sure that we're going to control it. There has been some restriction on quarantine movements, but it takes no more than one female to hitch a ride for the 4-day or 5-day trip across from the west, and we've lost it. So that's one. Sorry?
Yeah, do you know if that Corimbia was a stressed one? Because in the picture you can't see any keno.
No, we know it's attacking live trees, so probably somewhat stressed. Western Australia has had some, until fairly recently, had some pretty harsh conditions that have stressed a lot of their plant material. So that probably hasn't helped. But I mean, we get the same problem on the East Coast. You get, 5 or 6 years of dry weather like you've had down in Melbourne, or like we've had in Sydney or the Northern Rivers. I remember being up about 3 years ago in the Northern Rivers in the Walpetta, and it's almost barren. So those are going to make the host trees really vulnerable. We do know that there are trees that the borer will cause damage to, and the young aren't reproduced, so there's no reproduction. and then there are reproductive hosts.
Mark,
But-
would the effect of the fusarium, affect the ability of the tree to employ kino production? Would that, if it shuts the various vessels and so forth down, wouldn't that also tend to
Kino is produced by specialised parenchyma cells, so
not really?
yeah, I don't think so. But again, remember how a tree allocates its reserves: foliage growth, root growth, secondary growth. They're all things that happen before you get defense system coming into effect. So defense system is one of the last allocations of carbohydrate reserves. So you get a stressed tree, its defense systems are down. Survival is the first phase rather than defense. Reproduction comes before defense. That's why you get those occasional things called death flowering, when you get a tree that's getting close to dying, and instead of defending itself, it'll take all its reserves to survival of the species. So, it's like me coming to the end of my life. Well, I'm just going to explode and throw money everywhere to help out other people. It's sort of doing that process. Very altruistic compared with people. So it's a scary thought. I've been over now and had a look and consulted on it a couple of times. I do have thoughts that we will probably make some improvements in the management regime that are quite significant. But at this stage, again, oddly enough, the Western Australia government has historically been trying to stop any work because they've been trying to eradicate, and then trying to eradicate means that once you've found it, rather than trying to manage it, you want to try and cut the tree down and immediately chip it up and destroy it. Chipping does a pretty good job of stopping the life cycle.
Hey Mark, is it the same fusarium as the Canary Island date palm?
No, it's not. It's the same genus Fusarium, but Fusarium is just such a broad range of things. So the Great Potato Famine was about Fusarium, again a different species, and it's interesting. When Fusarium oxysporum canariensis, which affects the Canary Island palms, was described, there'd already been a Fusarium of date palms described. It was Fusarium oxysporum albanensis. And so you get these really little unique niches cut in Fusarium. And so this little one, the insect in part is identified by the genetics of the Fusarium. So if you identify the Fusarium, you can identify the beetle.
And is the Fusarium only associated with that beetle? It won't.
Yeah. There's three species in the genus of polyphagous that polyphagous shotthole borer is involved in, and all three of them have fungal association, but as I understand it, only one of them has a really bad association. So, and there's actually one, Jeremy, that is in Queensland, and I believe it has been introduced. It's one of the related species, and it's nowhere near as problematic. And there's just been a little shotthole borer in New South Wales that affects Pittosporum, causing Pittosporum decline, and it's still to be identified, and maybe a whole new species. A whole new species, a whole new genus. So again, it's all those things. And Peter, you asked that question a few months ago. Did we ever answer that?
Did I?
How do you go about finding something new?
Oh yeah, I think we did talk about that, and went across the procedure fairly briefly, but I think you did. You have spoken to.
There's some good examples of it. I found a beetle that was causing problems. I knew it wasn't polyphagous shotthole borer. I could identify that out. I thought I'd had it identified correctly, but as I looked at it more, it was wrong. So I sent it in and said, hey, this is what I've got. It's so these some of you may have heard these beetles called ambrosia beetles. Is another name, and that's an old one, an old pest controllers one. And so I knew it was in that group, but that's as far as I could go with it. Once you get into insect taxonomy, I give up. And when you get into really small ones, almost everyone gives up. So some of the smaller stuff now, and DNA is the way that it's going. More and more, the identification is against DNA coding rather than going the hard way. So excellent. Peter, there's another image you've got, and we'll just pull that up.
Just on that as well, there's 2 webinars in November on Polyphagus shot all borer. I just read in the leaflet the other day. You'd know about that, Peter, wouldn't you?
Sorry, I'm just doing this.
Peter does it. I'll answer on that. Yes, there are 2 webinars, and I think it's worthwhile at least getting somewhat familiar with it so you can keep your eye open for it. The earlier you spot it, the better off you're going to be. So I think that's fairly important. So I made a comment that some of the forest species tend to produce ray rotation as a self-shedding process, and I made that comment in one of the vlogs, and David Evans, who occasionally listens in, hi David, and will join us on occasions as a mentor hopefully, said, well, what do you mean? And you can see here there's the dark coloured bit in the middle is what normal branch would look like at the break, that dark red, and it's just been snapped off. And then as you get around the outside, the rays are running rotationally around the outside edge. Peter, can you just, where those fibers, right from the top right to the bottom there, they're semicircular.
Yeah, I am moving my cursor. I don't know if you can see anything there.
That's normal. And then the outside bit, the whitey coloured bit, you can see how those strands are going in that semicircular pattern. That's ray rotation. And the tree is doing this, I suspect, not accidentally. There's this talk from Maddock about this being an accidental thing. I think this is being done as an early opportunity for the branch to be shed if the tree so decides. This is a branch that's less important, and in closed forest species, things like grandis, saligna, mountain ash, where you have them join canopies and they have no lower branches, these long straight trunks. There's a real advantage in being able to shed like this. And the advantage is you can close the wound up if you're the tree a lot quicker, a lot more efficiently. So I suspect, and it's only a hypothesis, please don't take me to the bank on it. I suspect this is being done by the tree deliberately to shed itself. If things go along well, it's okay, it's still functioning. If things get to the stage where, well, hell is no good anymore, then this gives us the opportunity to get rid of a branch fairly efficiently. And by doing it this way, it reduces decay. So keep an eye open for it. You can see it when it sheds by that rotation of the rays, that circular things. The rays are all going, instead of in and out like the inside bit, that's what a branch should look like when it breaks off. That outside bit is ray rotation. And I know, yeah.
Is this the same as what you've referred to as ray attack in the past? So
yeah, ray attack. Yep. Yeah, Maddock calls it 3 different things.
Yeah.
Just to make life difficult. So yes, this is exactly the same thing. So the rays are going 90 degrees from the direction they should be going. They're going circumferentially rather than just in and out. And so that makes it easier for this to break off. I think you could possibly see it if you were at the branch union looking at it on some of the smooth bark species. Some of the smooth bark trees, you can see the direction of the rays in the bark itself and in the wood when the bark's been shed. Because the cambium is laying down the bark in the same sort of pattern that it's laying down the wood. So you can often see that same process.
Where's the top and the bottom, please, Mark?
Oh, sorry. Top is on the right-hand side, bottom's on the left-hand side. So it's pretty typical. And I don't know how frequently you would see. Oh, you'd see it down in your southern end of the world where you get your bigger trees. I suspect that exactly the same thing is occurring.
We see something very similar on Terrallianas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And we can't pre-pick it, so that's a part of the issue. Afterwards we can pick it, but this goes back into that background level of risk. And again, on that issue, David said, "Well, look, Mark, the background level of risk from trees is less than 1 in 5 million." He's absolutely right. 1 in 5 million is the absolute highest it could be, assuming that what we do as arborists is of some value. I am challenged by that because I'm not sure that what we do in terms of doing tree risk assessments is really of much value at all. I think, the likelihood that we're going to spot that tree that's going to kill somebody is pretty damn small.
Minute.
It'll happen one day, I'm sure. But it's got to be fairly rare. And if you did see it, would you even think that it was going to fail? I mean, I think that was the issue with the Bridget Wright fatality is, if anyone had looked at that tree, they might have said, oh, yes, that limb's overextended, but we know now that overextended branches aren't any more likely to fail. So now I've got this overextended branch. If they thought it was going to fail and they were really concerned about it, they would have said to the school, let's isolate this area straight away. This is a concern. Those are the things that I think we can be doing that are valuable. And we know it's, close to failing. So I saw a tree last week that had a codominant stem that had split down probably 4 meters, and Eucalyptus botryoides, and it was gone from 2 parallel stems to 2 stems like this that are just curving out. You can see the older split has got some nice woundwood that goes down to almost nothing down the bottom, and that's probably something that might have failed in the next year or two, might have failed in the next week or two, but they're the rarities. They're the things I go around and wait to see every 3 or 6 months and think, oh, I found one finally. They're not the things I see on a daily basis anywhere. So, yeah, excellent, Peter. Thank you.
Sorry, Mark. What makes you sure that they're rays?
Can I just say they are? If we looked at them microscopically, we'd be absolutely certain they're rays.
Okay.
So yeah, they are rays, and it is ray attack. One way to answer that is to say that the wood doesn't go, the vessels don't go up and around. And vessels have got big holes in them, so you'd see it. There's no holes in these flattened bits that you're seeing there. And if you're ever at an Arbor Australia education event where we're doing anatomy and you want to come and see one, we always have a sample there. Come in and I'll happily show you hands-on. The other thing is parenchyma has a high specular glare. It shines off light because it's got a cellulose cell wall, so you can see it when you're looking at it in light. They do stick out quite obviously. It's not something you'll miss.
So that branch there, they would have nothing to do with abscission then, whatsoever.
Well, it is going to subside at that spot, and it will subside fairly neatly at that spot, which means it will occlude. And now I know because the way the rays have been set up, I've got tissue running circular around that. So everything is ready to start occluding quickly. I'm going to have a small wound that occludes quickly. That's really desirable. And so if the tree decides it's time to go, it's more vulnerable at that spot than other spots. And that's got an advantage. And I first came across this decades ago and never realized what it was. I was working on a Eucalyptus sligna and was changing my rope position. Unfortunately, I was clipped in, and the branch I was standing on was probably 60 or 70 millimeters in diameter, more than strong enough to take my weight back then, and it just popped out exactly like that. And I had no idea, and now I see this more regularly. And as I said, I'm just hypothesizing that it makes sense. It's a process that tall, straight, fast-growing trees that don't have a lot of permanent low branches use to get rid of their lower branches when the time comes, and that intuitively makes good sense. Now, that doesn't make it science. So somebody somewhere or other at some stage may well go out and get themselves a PhD just to go through that process, and good on them. They're welcome to it. Okay, so the next question I've got, and I have got a couple of just straight questions that have come in, and I've got to go to the emails, which I'm doing now. That's Graham's. We've dealt with that. We didn't show his pictures, but I apologise. Okay. This is one from Rob. It says, "Hi, Peter. Councils in Melbourne often demand a non-destructive root investigation by hydro evacuation. In Melbourne, clay soils, the roots suck the moisture out of the soil, leaving the soil as hard as. The hydro guys turn up the water pressure up to break the clay. In doing so, they cut the bark off the roots. Do we still consider this non-destructive?" If you read the draft of the Australian Standard for Protection Trees and Construction Sites, you'll see that we've tried to make that a little clearer. So, no, it's not perfectly non-destructive. In fact, I think we took it out. The problem's clay soils. It's not to do with how dry they are. You get them nice and moist, and it still takes a fair effort to break the cohesive nature apart. Once you get over about
fairly low pressure as well, it doesn't take much to blow the bark off.
About 120 to 140 psi will start causing bark damage. So it's not a lot.
Hydrovacs typically operate at over 1,000, are they?
2,000 and 3,000.
Yeah,
Yep.
two generally. Yeah.
So once you're at 2,000, 1,000 psi, you guarantee you're going to tear off bark. So no, I don't think it's non-destructive. I think it's destructive, and that's part of the reason, on my view, has been, if you're going to do that sort of investigation with that sort of equipment, you might as well just cut and get on with the construction. And it's interesting. So I discussed it last year when I caught up with Tom Cox in the US. I said to him, "Tom, how many transplants have you sat down and done root investigation on before you decide the size of the root plate?" Now, here's a man that, if you talk 3-meter root plates plus, has probably moved 10,000 of them in his life. What do you think the number is?
Zero.
Which sort of makes a mockery of the investigation process. Now, I don't think that it's without merit, but I think it's often overprescribed by people and then misunderstood by people as to what they get. So they get a result back, and I can think of an example. I won't mention the council, but the jacaranda, 65 centimetre diameter trunk, 5.5 or 6 centimetre diameter root. No, you can't cut that root. The tree will fall over. Now, jacarandas are so tolerant of root damage, it's almost appalling, particularly if you do it during the dormant season, which has just come out of and just about to go into leaf. So if you did it about a month or so ago, just before flower, they are just tolerate amazing abuse again. I'm not saying we should abuse trees, but I've seen construction sites where they've just excavated, 1 times trunk diameter away on one side down to bedrock, and the trees just flourish on, and you sit there and think, I give up.
Yeah, but it's frustrating when you get a response that says, the loss of a root may cause the tree to decline and die. It may, but it may not, and it's much more likely not to, yet still LGAs insist on framing it like that.
It's interesting. So we addressed that in the root loss calculator. Those of you who have seen it, the root loss calculator, you can put in the trunk diameter. So you can put in a 65 centimeter diameter trunk, and it will actually tell you. You can tell it what percentage of the roots you want to lose in one cut. So you say, I don't want to lose any more than 5% in one cut, and it will calculate out for you what size root maximum you should allow to be cut on that basis. And that'll give you a fairly good set of controls. And my view is 5% in any one root is not likely to ever be a problem. So it's on, I think it's on the third page of the root loss calculator.
Oh,
So
yeah, Rob.
sorry. So when the roots have had their bark scun off, what's the possibility of them recovering that root?
Putting back on almost zero, because the pressure's so high that you actually damage the parenchyma below. Could you put on lanolin? Yes, you could, and you make some response. Not sure that's a feasible situation given the amount of damage that I see when they do it. I just think it's a good sign that we just don't get what's happening with roots yet. That bark is lost. Now, the bottom portion of those roots will often still be functional. So you've lost 30% of the circumference to 60% of the circumference or more, depending on the angle and the direction the guys come from. And quite honestly, at 1,000 psi, you may get some wood damage. At 2,000 psi, you can cut through small roots fairly easily still. And at 5,000 and 6,000 psi, we're using it to transplant trees. We're cutting the roots to physically move the tree. And as I said, at 10,000 psi, you can cut through anything, and you can go beyond that. You can check it up. You can add grit with your high pressure water cutter, and you can cut through steel. Cold cutting, they use it, for example, on Ford's dashboards to cut the metal there without any distortion in the steel, because it's cold and profile, so it's just like a laser. So, you know, if it can do that sort of thing, it can do the same sort of thing to your tree root. So I think it's a difficult one. If it's in clay soils, air won't work. If it's clay soils, water doesn't work. And if it's clay soils, digging is just such a miserable job that everyone hates it. So I'm not sure. Having said that, clay has a good water holding capacity. So there are some advantages to clay soils when it comes to damaging roots as well. So it's not just one-sided. I'd rather damage roots in a tree that's growing in clay soil than damage roots in a tree that's growing in shallow, loamy, sandy loam over sand. It's just a recipe for disaster.
Would you say, Mark, that if you're still going to have your underside of the root still active, if there's an option between losing the root completely or getting the job done and damaging part of the root, that would be a better outcome?
Yes, look, if you're talking about a bad way, for example, to put a service in or something like that. Having said that now, though, a lot of our directional boring and thrust boring is pretty damn sophisticated.
Yeah, far better.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting. We're discussing this in New Zealand at a workshop I did, discussing, you know, where do you run your boring implements, and everything used to be under the middle of the tree, but we know now that the roots that go down, the sinker roots, are ideal. So ideally, if you're running thrust boring or directional boring or drilling, you'll do it about so that it's passing about 2 to 3 times trunk diameter to the side of the tree, rather than directly underneath the tree. That means longer lengths of bore are often required to stop or minimize damage, but the end result is better for the tree. Yeah. Let me go to the second half of that question, because there was a second half, wasn't there, Rob?
No, I think that's it.
That was it, yeah. Do we consider it non-destructive? No, it's not non-destructive, it's destructive. As is hand digging. And you will notice in the new draft Australian standard, hand digging has been inserted, because hand digging, and in fact, even digging with an excavator, a guy with a small little 2 or 3 ton excavator can feel a root that's 25 mils in diameter. And if you're talking about digging past a big fig tree with, a metre diameter trunk, good luck if you think you're going to pull out a 100 millimetre diameter root. So, there are times when mechanical digging at a larger distance is probably acceptable as well. I think, it's just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think you've got to look at what's pragmatic. And I'm of the view, and I've made it fairly public, that the ideal protection on development sites maximizes yield whilst maximizing tree retention. And that is, you're trying to do the two together. And you can't do that when you stubbornly say, look, no, we've got to be 12 times trunk diameter away from the tree, or no, you can't be closer than 8.4 times trunk diameter, 10% minor encroachment, or with a new standard, maybe 50% encroachment, which is 20% encroachment, which is 6 times trunk diameter away. Trees will tolerate more than that, depending on how you treat them during and after the process and before the process. So I think we want to try and maximize tree retention. I think that's good. Why we want to maximize yield is we want to reduce urban sprawl. If we maximize tree retention without maximizing yield, then all we're doing is taking the removal of that tree and substituting with the removal of 2 or 3 trees to the north of Melbourne, or to the north and west of Brisbane, or to the west of Sydney. And, if you're in the Sydney region, you go see Iron Park, you just want to pull your hair out. It's just a sea of dark black and grey roofs. And, we are starting to see some trees popping above, which is exciting. But, you lose decades of canopy, and you lose decades of biomass. Well,
I understand that there's a kind of benchmark figure of 30% of the tree root loss occurring before any significant deterioration, decline, death of trees can be expected. Is that useful, that sort of benchmark?
I think so. I think it's useful.
So if you consider that, and you do what you were talking about before, work backwards using that program,
yeah,
you can see that, if you've got, for example, a 500 mil DBH tree, you've got to lose a lot of roots before you get to the 30%. And so this idea of you can't chop a root or a couple of roots, or the sky will fall in. That really needs to be considered differently, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the standard. Has always said that the standard is about a process, and the standard says, when you, Matthew, I see your hand, and I'll get to you in a few minutes. When you exceed the 12 times trunk diameter, you want to come closer, you've got to start doing things, and so you've got to start explaining why and how.
But it's not prohibitive. It doesn't say you can't.
No, exactly. It births us as the professionals to say, look, let's look at this objectively. Let's not look at this based on a standard, but let's do what the standard says. And the standard says, demonstrate the tree to remain viable. And my perfect one is almost every transplant's done with somewhere between 5 and 6 times trunk diameter radius, so 10 to 12 times total. And so that's an incursion of about 20-odd%. An incursion of 80%, at least with 20% left. Why did transplanted trees survive on that basis? And, how come that can be done when we can't just come in and do, a semicircular cut at 10 times trunk diameter?
I've got an example here in Byron Bay where we put a root barrier around a fig tree because it was climbing over and disrupting the footpath. And I calculated that encroachment to be 84%. So we didn't have a very big root area, and we capped the root barrier so the tree couldn't escape. So it's contained. It can never grow additional roots to compensate for those roots lost. And all we do is give it a bit of mulch every couple of years, and it's still there, it's still fine. It's not
Yeah, look,
growing all that quickly, but
yeah. No, look, I agree totally. I got called out to Ningen. A tree had been cut by the council, three sides, one times trunk diameter out, about 600 deep on three sides. It didn't shed, and it was Ficus microcarpa hillii. And Hill's figs are a drought deciduous species, so they'll shed their canopy almost entirely if it gets too dry. And so no shedding. And I thought, well, it's got lots of sinker roots. And so we braced it. We tested it with a tree motion sensor, braced it for a period of 12 months just so they could feel relaxed about it. And the tree hasn't missed a beat. It still hasn't shed. It just goes through life like normal. So again, the importance of how the rest of the root system, we have this view of a root system that is like the Morton Arboretum, shallow, large area. And that is only partially true. It's true in certain soil types, with certain tree types. You get something like an Araucaria, and it's going to have sinkers everywhere. Just genetically, gymnosperms like to divide regularly. And there's some beautiful drawings of root systems where people have dug them up and mapped them and drawn them for us. They show you what they look like, and nothing like the standard modern arboretum. When we got to redoing the drawing in the standard, we said, well, how are we going to do it? And we pulled up a whole pile of images and said, which one? Because, there are 30 or 40 real sort of distinct different types of root systems, and sinker roots are important for a whole pile of them. Really significant. Matthew, you've got a question you're waiting patiently. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just the root loss calculator. Is that yours or is that available somewhere?
That's available. It is mine. So we've made it public domain. It was, again, one of the decisions we made as a company that we would make that available for the industry because we just think it's so important. So rather than just doing a root investigation and saying I've got a root of 10 centimeters, 4 centimeters, and 8 centimeters, and throwing it to the wind and letting somebody's liver quiver, somebody in the council says, oh, that sounds too much, or no, I'm fine with that. We've benchmarked it against a 30% loss, and it's using allometry, which is the science of measuring one component and figuring out the whole. So, for example, if I do my height to mass, my body mass index says that I'm morbidly obese, and so that's based on an allometric equation, and that is my height should result in a certain weight to be nice and fit and healthy, like Nils is. Okay.
I think there's a link to it in our Dropbox, but if you would like to ship me an email, I'll certainly make sure you get a link to it.
Right. Our goal is to make it as available as possible. And it's interesting, Andrew Benson, the root expert out of New Zealand, did some checking recently of his root allometric equation with the approach that we took, and found a fair degree of consistency between the two. So the lines were pretty well identical. So again, gives me confidence that the approach is logical. It's not been supported by 100 tree research data. It's used by looking at other research that's given us the data and then saying, let's apply this in a way that it's never been applied. And there's good reason to believe that it's very conservative rather than very risk prone. So the likelihood of being wrong is fairly unlikely. I've already had someone report cutting out 120% of the root system in a few roots, and not because the tree had a lot more roots than normal, and so you're going to get that. What you're not going to get is a root biomass that's substantially lower than normal. Our lower quartile were almost out of that range all the time. So we've been very conservative with the approach on it. And so it's not, again, meant to be the limit. It's just saying, following this, there's a really good argument. And I think I showed you the tree where we cut into the trunk with a stump grinder and said, let's make a cavity, and the tree's still sitting there with a cavity so they could get in the manhole underneath it. 1/3 loss of a tree with a cavity, we say that's acceptable. If that's acceptable and it's not going to need to be cut down, then all the roots that were at the bottom of that cavity have gone, the tree's still standing there. It doesn't need that 1/3 to stop it from falling over. And we've all seen trees with 40 and 50 and 60%. So not saying we want to push that far, but there are times when I'd rather get to 40 or 50% and keep the tree than lose the tree. So does that answer the question, Matthew, well enough? Good. Guys, if there are no other questions, I'll let it open up to any questions from the floor.
I was going to ask, is there a standard for tree transplanting in Australia?
No, there isn't. There is an ANSI standard. I don't know that there'll be a standard for transplanting, and I don't know really how significant the one is in the US. I know that Standards Australia is thinking about doing some other tree-related standards. I know that's been discussed at the committee. I don't think I'm out of line in saying that. I'm not going to tell you what standards, but I'd say keep your ears on. Don't be surprised if you see a whole new tree-related standard come out in the next, for start, in the next 12 months. So you'll see AS 4970 come out. I think it'll be 2025. And then in 2025, I think you'll see a new standard come into production fairly quickly. I think it'll be a fairly short standard, but a fairly significant standard in terms of our profession. There's something for excitement, isn't it?
It's interesting.
But I'm not allowed to talk about it because that's the rules. So,
Heard nothing.
Any others? No, guys. I want to thank you for.
I've
Go ahead.
got two quick questions. I prepared a report for a client that wanted to get a shed installed. Basically, shed was replacing an old one, but trees would have to be removed for the shed, and some replacement of retaining walls and whatnot, which would include further excavation. The shed is basically would have to remove large gum trees and whatnot. Question being is the client has spoken to an arborist and they can get the trees taken out under a bushfire 1050 rule. I'm just wondering about reporting on that sort of thing. Do I have to include those trees as part of a report for the council?
My advice, and it'd be interesting, I don't know whether they've got anyone from a municipal council online tonight, because I don't get to see all the names. But my advice to the client, if I was the arborist, would be if you can get rid of them under the bushfire regulations and you want to put the shed in, get rid of them under the bushfire regulation, then get your plans done and put them in without the trees on them. If that's the approach you want. So now, unfortunately, the 1050 legislation, in my mind, is just a bad piece of evil legislation, but it is the legislation we're governed by, and we also have a duty to serve clients. So,
totally get it. Like, there's three massive gums and a paper bark. The paper bark's fine. The gums are busted. And then they got two other juniperus there that they would survive massively, but I new to the whole outside thing compared to electricity stuff. I just wanted to get some sort of take on it, but they can legally do it, I suppose.
That's mine, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us your view, Jeremy? Because you're in a different state with a different set of regulations.
Like you said, if it's there operating within the boundaries of what the current legislation says, and they can remove the trees under that legislation, then remove the trees, then put you in your application. Like you say, we've got we're here to retain the trees, but ultimately the client's not doing anything that's not within their rights already. If it fits within that legislation,
Yeah,
just be very clear up front that did fit.
100%. So should I include that in the actual report?
No.
No. Well, I would get the trees removed before you do your report, and then I'd get the survey plans amended to only show the trees that are retained.
Okay.
And I would be talking to him to see if there's some way of tweaking the design.
No, I've tried. They've got. I've tried. So there's trees along the back that technically they're terrible. Yeah. But
Yeah,
they've got a whole row of conifers at the back that if they move the shed forward a metre, they can sustain them.
Okay, so again, it's a decision-making process. My view of the world is that whilst it's nice to try and retain trees, and I would like to, the client's entitled to do what they're entitled to do under law, and our job is to give them the best advice that we can.
Yeah.
And the right advice always is, if you can remove them and you want to remove them, then start the project. Because anytime you can stop complicating a process, even though they might be able to remove them under 1050, he says, I want to remove them under the 1050 and the shed's going to go over the top of them. All of a sudden that starts to enliven a whole pile of issues.
Exactly. Yep.
And if another one that I can tell you from experience, you've got a neighbour's tree and you want to get rid of the tree, and the neighbours agreed to, they've put an application to the city said yes, you can get rid of the tree, then you put your application in to build, you've made a mistake. As soon as that you get that approval to remove the tree, then you put your application in. The reason why is when the neighbour all of a sudden says, no, I don't want that building to be that colour, and you can't come to an agreement, all of a sudden that tree that he's just agreed to get cut down is the most valuable tree that's ever happened in his life. And, he's thinking about getting it put on the State Heritage Register. And I have had it happen where, the whole building had to be redesigned, and it cost the client a fortune simply because he didn't want to be fronting up with $3,000 or $4,000 removal cost before he started to build. As soon as you know that those trees are going to go, if you can get rid of them and simplify the development.
100%. All right. Okay. One more further question. I had a call from a guy today to go and look at a tree, which I'm going to do this week. Basically, he's bought a block with the house and everything on it, shed, whatever. He doesn't know. I don't know whether I'm hearing the truth, so take that in how you will.
I mean, clients lie to us?
Potentially, as you would know. Tree, I've looked back through Google Maps a couple of years. Tree's been busted for a while. The pictures he sent me is a client has, or a previous person has taken to the tree with an axe. He's put in a application to the council, which they've said he can remove dead wood and 5% of living branches, whatnot. The tree looks like 80% of it's dead. I'm just want to get some feedback on going back against.
Just give me the facts, Dano. Just give me the facts. So sit there and just take what you see. If the client says something, by all means, you can report it down. So the client says that the tree's fallen and hit his kids 4 times, you can put that down. And it's just so he feels like he's been. I don't know that that's true. I don't care. I just say the client says.
100%. Yeah. Okay. I don't know this guy from a bar or so.
And then as far as the rest is
out there,
report what you see.
Yeah.
The facts. So there's axe damage. It appears to be recent. It appears to be older. There's a broken top. There's, the tree, about 80% of the canopy appears to be dead or in severe decline. Whatever you see, I go so far as to say the tree has been poisoned. If I see that the tree's got drill holes and it's got typical glyphosate-based poisoning, and I just report it as it is. I haven't said that I know who's done that, and we don't, Darren. That's the honest truth.
Yeah, no.
It could, for all you know, it could be his kids that have done it, the neighbour that did it whilst he was away. So if we just report what we see, and then we say to the client, I'm not responsible for the decisions that the city makes.
Yeah, definitely.
It's out of my hand. All I can do is give them the facts.
Yep, definitely. No, I appreciate it.
My experience has been that most city arborists nowadays are relatively competent. Okay, so I did say relatively, Jeremy. They don't miss the obvious things, and the number of times that a minute thing is important is very rare. So in most cases, the judgment's a fair and reasonable one. And I would say in the last 10 years, I've maybe had one missed issue that was significant. So it's pretty rare that a city arborist gets it wrong.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to give them a second opinion.
Yes.
And that's as important for them. My experience is that clients, for whatever reason, don't trust government. I'm not saying that that's understandable or anything else, but they just somehow or other feel that maybe the council's got their own vested interest. And so by going out and reassuring them is a really important service to do for them. All of a sudden I can say, look, no, the council's got it right. Tree's good, probably shouldn't go. I understand how you feel. Maybe in 10 years' time, if it drops off a big branch and it does some damage to the house, they might feel differently. But for the time being, their decision seems to be a smart one.
Yeah.
And they'll whinge and bitch at you for half an hour, and that's fine. I bill them by the hour, so.
100%. 100%.
Okay. Any other questions, guys?
Thank you for that.
Could I just have a quick clarification on the 1050 and 1030 rule? It's
in New South Wales, we have this piece of legislation that allows us to remove trees and shrubbery within certain limits from a bushfire zone, declared bushfire zone. And it's not the brightest piece of legislation. It had a number of amendments, wasn't well thought out. It's settled down a fair bit. In the earlier days, we're having people cut down trees on the other side of bays and inlets because the bushfire was on the other side, and between them and the bushfire there's 100 or 20 meters or 30 meters of water. It was just one of those weird things.
If you go to the RFS site, there's a way of looking up your property so that you can find out whether or not the 1050 rule applies to the property. And there's also
New South Wales.
we've got the 1050 and the 1030 in Victoria too, and you can look up if your property's got a BMO overlay on Vic Plan, I think it's called, and from my understanding, if you've got the BMO overlay, then you can clear 1050. But if you haven't got the overlay, you can only clear 1030. Is that right?
I don't know what it is in Victoria. Maybe someone else down there can add to that.
It's definitely in New South Wales. And in New South Wales, even though your property may be subject to the 1050 rule, there's still some other rules. So, for example, if the LGA, local government, has conditions development approval on trees being retained, that overrides the 1050 rule, and there's some other things as well.
Biodiversity legislation. So, look, fire's an interesting one, and I get frustrated when I hear you read the code, and it's an Australian-wide code, and the code says should not have branches over the roof, and I read that exactly as it says, should. So you've got a tile roof, you probably should take that advice. You've got steel roof with half space trusses, so it's really good impact resistant. What the hell are you worried about a branch over your building for? It's not going to do anything. So I think these things are often rushed into thinking and people don't think them through. And I've certainly had situations where, the city has expressed concerns about tree removal that probably didn't need to occur. And I can think of another one where the trees to be removed were close to the building with camellias. Now, they just don't burn. Casuarinas are another one. People look at them and say, oh, they're a conifer. They're not. They're fragile. They're closely related to oaks and fagus. What's fagus? Can't think of a common name for it. Beech. Thank you. Yeah. So, we've got these trees that don't want to burn well, and yet they're treated exactly the same as pinus, which burns really well because it's got these resins in it, and these resins, terpenes, are combustible. When the tree is green, they burn quite well. So, I think trees are a low priority in society still because we don't value them. And so, I do my best to try and keep them. But again, I've got the city saying remove all the branches over the roof. And my client says, well, I don't want any branches over the roof. Well, I'm fighting a losing battle, just like Darren was talking about. Yeah. And my job's just purely to give advice. It's not like I do the tree work. So it makes no difference from that side. But even just giving the advice, there are days when I feel like it should be lawful to go out and shoot people. No, I don't mean that realistically. Don't go reporting me to the Federal Bureau or whatever it is. But yeah, there are a whole pile of people out there that don't like trees.
And I think that's a really important point. Is we can only give advice. We can't enforce anything, or we can try and make changes, try and make suggestions to designs and how to retain trees, but ultimately it comes down to client will and councils enforcing it.
Yeah, and I've certainly put in reports for a development site, for example, where every tree was shown as being removed on the plans, and I said to the developer, this is just not, there's no way they're going to accept this. And he said, that's what I want to do. He put it in, he didn't get it approved. And he said to me, why are we paying you for a second time to write a whole new report? I said, because now we're doing the hard work. Saying we're going to remove every tree was the really easy bit. I should charge you a lot more for the second one. And that's their choice. I mean, clients take a risk at that. And, I have no problems with a person putting an application into a council and getting a no. I know that the cities would rather us say no for them beforehand, but that's not my job. That's what they get paid for. My job is to give them the facts, and then they get to make their decision. And one of the complaints that I often get about my reports to the city or to council is that oftentimes it'll be missing a recommendation. That's because it's not my job. My job is giving them the facts. I can't recommend what they should do because I'm not the consent authority.
You talk about the recommendations and whatnot, and tree protection zone, fencing, whatnot. You guys have been doing it for a long time. I'm only starting out. Do I recommend that the reports that I've done, I've put in that consulting arborist should sign off on tree protection, fencing, all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Do you guys do that yourselves? Like, do you install the tree protection fencing, or do you actually just watch what's going on? Like, I try to be cost effective for whoever I'm working for.
Okay, Darren, I can share an answer for you. It'll vary greatly from arborist to arborist, situation to situation. Temporary fence panels are cheap enough to hire and buy that other people go ahead and deal with that usually.
100%.
I had a client about 18 months ago say, look, I'm doing this building. Do you really need to come out, or can I just send you a photograph of where the fence is in place? I said, go ahead and send me the photograph. I don't need to go.
Exactly.
I don't know what your tree looks like.
Yeah, I'm hearing you now.
Said it's right. That's it. Depending on the encroachment. But now, if you're talking about coming 5 times trunk diameter away from a tree, I probably want to be there somewhere between once every week and once every month, because things can go sour on a development site very quickly as well. So you as an expert, and this is difficult because you as an expert have to start making calls. What I will tell you, and Jeremy's going to tell you something completely different, and Peter will tell you something different, so I'll hear them. I would say 19 out of 20 development site reports I do, somebody else does the whole thing, and at the end of it all, somebody else gets a call, and almost none of it's ever implemented.
Yep, definitely. Every job that I've done so far, I've never, and I don't expect a call back about it. So I'm not trying to blow them for money.
They should be getting an arborist in. Peter, how many of yours don't get an arborist in?
Look, occasionally I have to provide certification report and inspect the fences, but usually it's driven by council, where council hate this particular developer or this particular project and just make life as difficult as possible.
Yep.
But in most cases, the builders do sort of a half job at protecting the trees, and in my view, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
Jeremy?
And what we see up here is up until pre-start, they're really good. They set the fencing out, they put the fencing in. If we're there, we make it very clear that, look, if you want a certification in the end, like Mark said, we need to be involved. And that can be from, I've had jobs where it's daily. But most is generally fortnightly or monthly. So on the simple fact, because I've got some great photos of the excavator digging a trench past the tree one week and the fence up mulched and perfect for planned ceiling at the end of the job. So, and we just make it clear, and we do have about, of the ones we get involved with, most of them go fine, but there's probably 50% that just don't do anything. They'll set it up at the beginning and then they don't want you there, and that's fine. It's your call. Just don't ask for a certification at the end.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Like you can't say you're there if you're not there. That's the thing, isn't it?
Definitely not. Just the facts.
Definitely.
And Brisbane's actually calling for inspection logs now before they do plant ceiling. So they won't. And I've had several jobs where they wouldn't sign off on it, and it took them months to get it resolved. And the developer's going, well, what do I do? And I said, well, listen to me 3 months ago, and as I told you, we need to be there. I don't know how they got out of it. They got out of it eventually, but obviously it cost them a lot of money in the end.
Jeremy, I had a brilliant one the other day. I don't like it because it defies how I see the world should be. But the city turned around and said, well, you're meant to have tree protection up, and you didn't. And they said, well, because we didn't use the street frontage, we used the lane at the rear, and so we didn't need to have protection up the front. And the city said to them, well, if you want to get occupation, you better put the protection up at the front post-construction. So what they were saying is what the city was saying is, we don't want you to benefit from not having done what you should have done. Now, I find that somewhat small-minded, but I do understand the other side, that if it doesn't hurt and people don't get used to doing it. I mean, we all know how many panels of fence it takes to protect a tree. If you've got a 4 metre by 4 metre enclosure, that's 2 panels on each side, that's 8 panels. But that's not 8 panels. It's usually 4 panels or 3 panels or 2 panels. And that's the dilemma. As Peter says, if you get it down to 4 panels, well, you know, they don't wash out the concrete and pour the mineral terps under the tree, you might get away with it. And frequently they do. And that's the reality. Is what we're teaching builders is that arborists are idiots. They don't know what they're talking about, because we said he had to be 4 metres away from the tree, and all of a sudden he realises he can get away with it 2 metres from the tree.
Yeah, he can get away with it 2 metres from the tree on opening day. But let's go back and have a look at that tree in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years' time.
Well, I think trees are a lot more resilient than we give them credit.
Definitely.
You know, I mean, there's things that you can do that really muck them up, like pouring the terps out and stuff like that. But they are resilient. The
amount of times you've gone back to trees that you just thought that's going to go backwards, and it just doesn't blink.
And Mark was talking earlier about the damage to roots and so forth and so on. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that roots aren't static. So you chop the roots, on a particular day, that's not the end of it. They immediately start to regrow. So, and after a year, couple of years, they pretty much replace those roots that have been lost, provided they've got somewhere to do that. And
provided they've got suitable environmental conditions. So we're not in a drought. And, you know, one of the biggest issues on development sites, and I say this constantly, is water. You know, the guy with an IQ of 80 that runs the development site, and I can think of one, I don't think he's got an IQ of 80. I think he's better than that, but he sounds like it. And he'll say to me, Mark, I put the water on this week. And he turns the one of those soaker hoses and a tap timer to 2 hours, and he puts it on. That 2 hour with a slow soak is just so valuable.
Yeah.
Nothing else, do that.
Yeah.